What's up guys, Landon here from the Full-Time Filmmaker team, and today we are checking out DJI's brand new all-in-one FPV drone. Before we jump into it though, I just want to quickly say that we are not being paid by DJI for this video, but obviously they were kind enough to send over this drone early so that we could test it out and give you our honest thoughts. So the DJI FPV is easily just the most interesting drone I've ever seen. Like, you can't really compare this thing to any other DJI drone because it's such an original design. Basically what it feels like DJI has done is taken a traditional FPV drone and then just completely modernize it so all the components are perfectly organized on the frame of the quad and then seamlessly integrated to this external shell. And the whole thing just looks like it's meant to go fast. Like, everything is angled forward and it's got this very fierce competitive vibe about it. And they've also given the controller just a complete redesign, so it actually looks and feels somewhat like a gaming controller, and it's honestly a bit more ergonomic than other DJI controllers that I've personally used. DJI also introduced their all-new motion controller, which, I mean, aside from the drone itself, is probably the most unique part about this new product launch. Basically, it just allows you to control the drone by just tilting it as if it's like a VR controller, so super interesting. You're also going to notice that between these two controllers, there's no screen or even a place for you to kind of mount your phone or tablet like you'd get on the Mavic or the Phantom controllers. And that's because the only way to see where you're going while flying this new drone is with DJI's FPV goggles. And just because I know this question is going to be asked, are the V1 FPV goggles compatible with this new FPV? The answer is no, but pretty soon with a firmware update, you will be able to use the V1 goggles as an audience member and then watch the DJI FPV be flown by somebody else with the V2 goggles. So in the DJI FPV combo, you get the aircraft, you get the goggles, the standard controller, and then one battery for $1,299 US. And you can also add on the Fly More kit, which includes 2 more batteries and a multi-battery charger for another $299 US. And then the motion controller is another accessory that you can get for an extra $199 US. And I know this is a huge question that a lot of people have with this device. What happens when you crash? Like, this is an FPV drone, and by nature, they are extremely prone to crashes. So how much is it going to cost when you fly this thing straight into the concrete at 80 miles an hour? So real quick, here is a price list for replacement parts that I got from DJI. If you just absolutely destroy your drone, or if you want to get a spare, it's $739, which is just the drone and an extra battery, so no goggles or controller. And then specific parts like the landing gear, the gimbal/camera assembly, the top shell, or the propellers honestly seem to be priced pretty reasonably, so I would say it is affordable. And I also asked how it would work if you had DJI Care Refresh, so their in-house insurance basically for their products. And they told me it works the same as if you got it for a Mavic, for example, where depending on the plan that you choose, it affects how much a replacement costs and what's covered. So I imagine you'll want to get one of those plans if you do plan on throwing this thing in full manual FPV mode. Okay, so that's the drone, that's what it costs, that's what you get inside the box. Now, what is this thing like to fly? We took it out to Knowles, Utah to film some content with our buddies at Zugo Bikes and try it out. Let's go. So it has several modes on this thing. It has the normal mode. This is honestly just like you were flying any other DJI drone. It's very easy to control. So normal mode is very classic. That's what makes this thing kind of a really good hybrid, is you do get that FPV experience, but you can also just switch it into normal mode pretty much anytime you want. After normal mode, you have sport mode. Basically what this does is it turns off the sensors on the front of the drone, and it's kind of like a hybrid between FPV and normal. Sporty mode, even on this thing, honestly just feels like you have a Mavic Pro and you throw it in sport mode. It's nothing crazy. You switch to manual mode and it makes you adjust your joysticks so they're just below the center actually. And I think it's really smart because there's a lot of people who might accidentally switch to manual mode and then lose control and crash. So for me, I'm not like a professional FPV pilot, but once you throw it in the full like acro manual mode, oh, there's a bird right there. It feels like you're flying an FPV, to me at least, but I mean, if you're a pro, if you're a professional FPV pilot, I'm sure you're gonna be able to tell a difference. It might not handle the way you want it to, but to me, like the average content creator / consumer, I'm not complaining whatsoever. So after flying this thing for a good few hours, confidently I can say that it is so fun and it handles actually really well. I was pushing it moderately hard and I got to go around 85 miles an hour, so it's not slow by any means. And DJI says that the battery will last about 20 minutes, and I can confirm that it pretty much does that unless you're really ripping it around, then you're looking at more like 10 minutes, which is actually still really good since the traditional FPV with a 1300 milliamp battery will probably go for around 3 to 5 minutes before dying. And if you've never used DJI's FPV goggles, it might be kind of weird to get used to operating the drone from this rather than with a screen attached to your controller, but it honestly just makes flying so much more fun. You get that 150-degree field of view while you're flying that's just super immersive, and you don't have to deal with glare on your screen trying to see where you're going. So honestly, I prefer it, and I think after you get used to it, you probably would too. Now, I didn't have the motion controller ready to go when I was filming in the desert, but I did try a couple of days later, and here is how that went. So right now the capabilities of this motion controller are fairly limited, but with a few firmware updates, we'll be able to unlock a lot more when you're controlling the drone. So right now it's pretty basic, but the way this works is you use this trigger on the back. This is the accelerator trigger right here, and then it has accelerometers inside, so you can kind of go back and forth and then forward as well. And with the headset right here, it's honestly a really immersive experience. So let's check it out. So I'm going to double click the lock button. It's going to turn on the propellers, and then I'll go ahead and hold it, and it's going to automatically take it off for me. Here we go. So I have both hands on it. You can just use one if you want to, but it kind of feels like you are a fighter pilot and you're just in the cockpit, like controlling your aircraft. Like, this is such a unique experience. You can tilt it left to right, you can pull it up, you can push it down. Like, this is so unique. So right now, like we talked about, it is kind of a basic mode, so you can't go full FPV, and I'm okay with that because this has never been done before. So you have to get used to how these controls work, but you still can tilt it as if you're like cruising around on an FPV. So overall thoughts, this thing is really awesome. It's super intuitive, very easy to use. You don't feel like you're out of control at all. I don't know how they did it, but this thing is so easy to fly. I really don't know what they're doing at DJI, but this is an awesome piece of tech. Now let's talk more about the camera system that this FPV is rocking. So it's equipped with a single axis gimbal that just tilts up and down, and the camera is the equivalent of a 35mm focal length. In video mode, it can do 4K at 60 and 50 frames per second, as well as 1080p at 120, 160, and 50 frames per second. And at the moment, you'll notice that it doesn't do 24 frames per second, but I've been told that it will be added later with a firmware update. And in photo mode, it can capture JPEGs at a resolution of 3840 by 2160. Would have been nice to have raw photos like we see on many other DJI drones, but again, that could change easily with a firmware update. You also get almost full manual camera control out of this thing, so you can adjust your ISO, your shutter speed, and your white balance, but it is a fixed aperture at f2.8. Not a huge deal in my opinion, because I generally like to keep my drones around f2.8 anyway. And you also have the option to shoot in the standard picture profile or with Cinelike D, and this has a 1/2.3 inch sensor. It's the same size as the sensor on the Mavic Mini 2. Since it is so small, it won't give you very good low light, and I wouldn't recommend pulling the ISO very high. So this is definitely a daytime drone, pretty much just like any other. DJI's also included Rocksteady EIS in this camera. It's the same technology that the Osmo Action uses. So basically it just smooths out any of the bumps and jitters that you would normally see while flying FPV, and it makes it so I have very little work to do in the editing room. I don't have to apply warp stabilizer or use any third-party software. Just immediately it looks exactly how I want it. So why do I love this drone? First off, it is honestly just so much fun to fly. I haven't picked up my Cinewoop FPV for quite a few months, but once I picked this thing up, it just like reignited FPV for me. It's also ready to fly right out of the box. It's fast, it's smooth, it has a brake and several other safeguards that'll keep me from crashing. It lands and it takes off like a standard DJI drone. It has normal and sport modes for when I just want to get some simpler shots. So for me personally, I think it's amazing. And not to mention the batteries on this are just like any other DJI drone. If you're into FPV or you've tried getting into it, you definitely know the struggle of charging traditional 4S and 6S batteries and the headache that is, because you're just worried they might explode and burn your house down. But with the DJI FPV, it just plugs into the charger and you honestly just can't beat that convenience. And even though I personally won't find myself using the motion controller that much, I do think it's a nice bonus to include, and I think a lot of people are going to appreciate it for its simplicity and the convenience that you get when flying in normal mode. All right, now we've talked it up, but what are some of the limitations of this drone? Since it's only a one-axis gimbal, it's not quite as smooth and cinematic in normal mode, since the gimbal can't follow the drone's movements as smoothly as a Mavic or a Phantom, for example. Plus, you can't actually tilt the gimbal straight down while hovering just because of the way it's designed. It just won't go down that far. And at the making of this video, there also aren't any smart modes available, like active track, for example. It's also a fixed camera system, so you can't mount a different camera to it. You're just kind of stuck with the one it has. And it is a good camera, but it would be nice to have some flexibility there. It also doesn't look like you'd be able to attach an ND filter, which is kind of a must in my opinion for drones. Maybe a third-party company will figure out how to do it, but at least at the moment, it's hard to see how they would. There's also not really any place for you to mount anything else to it, like a camera that faces the other way or a 360 cam if you want to capture BTS of the drone. So again, maybe a third-party company will find a way to do it, but at the moment, it doesn't look like that's possible. And between the cost of the FPV combo itself and the potential cost of replacement parts, it's not cheap, although I will say that FPV as a whole isn't cheap to get into anyway. But yeah, you want to make sure that this is in fact something you do want to get into. So on that note, who is this drone for and should you get one? Honestly, I think a wide range of people would really enjoy this drone, but it does feel like it's mostly geared for content creators and the casual hobbyist who are just looking for an easy entry point into the world of FPV, and maybe they want to create more dynamic aerial content without having to fully commit to understanding the technical aspect of FPV. This thing's ready to fly right out of the box, and with the exception of pre-built quads from places like Rotor Riot and Get FPV, I really don't think there's another drone that offers that level of convenience. I am super interested to see how the pro FPV community will accept this drone because it is a pre-built, closed, ready-to-fly system, and generally the pros would rather cull parts from a bunch of different companies and build and customize their own quads, so I doubt it would ever fully replace a pro's FPV, but I do imagine it'll still have a place on the shelf. I just think the lack of customization will keep them from fully adopting it. That's pretty much it for this video though, guys. We do have another video on how to get started in traditional FPV. If you want to check that out, I'll link it somewhere over here. Also, if you haven't already, go ahead and check out our 1-hour filmmaking training where we teach you our top 10 secrets to creating cinematic videos. Link for that is again somewhere up here and in the description below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, if you have any further questions, please let us know.